Thanks a lot for having me, and thanks for coming to the talk. Let's see if this works. Okay, cool. So I want to play a game. Who wants to be a millionaire? So the question is that what percentage of the blocks a validator with 25% of the stake should propose if we look at the blockchain slice of, say, 10,000 blocks or slots. So who votes for, and the validator is honest, who votes for A, hands up? Who votes for B, 30%? Okay, who votes for C, 25%? Okay, who votes for D, 26.6%? All right, so the correct answer is 25%. If the RANDAO and Ethereum would implement correctly this distributed randomness beacon, then as a validator, you should expect to have, if you have 25% of the stake, then also you should expect that you are able to propose the slots and the blocks 25% of the time. But sadly, this is not the case. So the next question is for $1,000. So what happens if this validator is economically rational and it exploits all these vulnerabilities that I'm going to describe to you? So you have, again, just as a toy example, 25% of the stake. In expectation, how much percentage of the blocks you can propose? A, 20%. All right. B, 30%. The RANDAO is not this bad. C, 25%. Okay. D. Okay, yes, you're right. So this is the right answer, and this is how I'm going to show you that how we can arrive to this number at the end of the talk. Okay, and at the end of the talk, there will be a $1 million question, so pay attention. So if you need to go and you need to run to other presentation, the TLDR is that there was a paper that also identified manipulation technique, the way you can modify and manipulate this RANDAO lottery, if you wish, that selects the validators. And this is a nice paper presented at last year AFT by Kaya Alturer and Matthew Weinberg from Princeton University. And we introduce a new class of strategies that allows us to manipulate the RANDAO even further. And so basically the truth is that the RANDAO is even more manipulatable than people thought. So for instance, if you have a coalition, or if you think of Lido, or a coalition of stakers that control 30% of the stake in Ethereum, then, and if they would manipulate the RANDAO systematically, then they would be able to propose almost 33% of the blocks. Okay, so just to be on the same page, let me just give you a quick rundown on leader selection in Ethereum. But first, why do we need randomness in consensus? So there's a very famous FLP and celebrated result, the FLP theorem, which says that permissioned traditional consensus needs randomness. Without randomness, it's impossible to have consensus in the asynchronous setting. But the good news is that once we have randomness, then we can have consensus in constant expected rounds. If you are interested, if you don't believe me, if you want to check out the FLP theorem's proof, then you can do so at this link. This is a nice blog post I suggest you to have a read. Okay, and there was a similar result that showed that we need also randomness in the permissionless consensus setting, and there, even in synchrony, without randomness, consensus is impossible. This was shown by Louis Pai and Ralph Garden. Okay, so we need randomness, and now let's see how Ethereum computes and outputs randomness. So in Ethereum, we have epochs. Each epoch is divided into 32 slots. One slot lasts 12 seconds, and at each slot, we select a validator that has the right to propose a block, and each valid block needs to contain a so-called RANDAO reveal, which is a randomness contribution to the output of this beacon. And this RANDAO reveal is nothing else, just a BLS signature on the epoch number. And it's important that it's a BLS signature because BLS signatures are unique and deterministic. So just like RSA signatures, I guess all of you know what's an RSA signature is. So the validator can, the only thing that the validator can do is just publish a valid block or not. They cannot grind this RANDAO reveal field of the block. And what we do in an epoch, we store all these RANDAO reveal values, and that's going to be the output of the RANDAO. So we have, and we take the output of the RANDAO, we feed it into a pseudo-random permutation, and we permute the list of the validators. So currently there are 1.1 million validators in Ethereum. Once we have the output of the beacon, we feed it into a PRP, a pseudo-random permutation. We permute the list of the validators, and the first 32 validator indices of this permuted list are going to be the validators in epoch E+2. The whole protocol is a little bit more complicated, but that's the gist of it. And this is how it looks like, this RANDAO reveal. It's a BLS signature. This is how it looks like in our favorite blockchain explorer, EtherScan. Okay. So what's selfish mining? Interestingly enough, selfish mining, so the ability that you can manipulate the RANDAO output was already known even before the merge, but the EF was saying, oh, okay, you can manipulate the RANDAO, but it's just a tiny bit. So imagine that you are this adversary denoted as red, and you own the last slot in epoch E. So what you can do, since you are in epoch E, you've already seen all the RANDAO reveals in that epoch, so you can compute the output of the RANDAO seed, right? And now what you see is, okay, I'm going to own 3 slots in epoch E+2. But wait a second, you can also refrain from publishing this last slot, right? And that also gives now a different RANDAO output, which results in a different seed. And this different seed will create another permuted set of validators, but this time you will end up with 6 slots in epoch E+2. So overall, you are better off by now, currently not publishing this block, but overall, since, okay, you throw 1 block to the dustbin, but in the future, you will obtain 3 more. So overall, you are better off. So in certain cases, if you have these tail slots, so from the RANDAO manipulation point of view, these tail slots are the most important ones. They allow you to pre-compute the output of the beacon. And we can generalize this. Imagine you have k tail slots. Now, for each tail slot, you have a binary choice, either publish the block or withhold the block. So this gives you altogether 2 to the k possibilities to 2 to the k different outputs of the RANDAO seed, and then you can pre-compute all these 2 to the k different configurations in epoch E+2, and obviously an economically rational validator would choose the setting which gives more slots to the validator. And this is just an example that happened in 2022 November. Lido had 8 consecutive tail slots, and basically in this particular case, Lido was honest because they published all the slots, all the blocks. And what you can see in the left-hand side is that in reality, Lido had 2 to the 8 possible decisions, right? For each tail slot, they could decide publish the block or not. This results in 256 possible RANDAO outcomes. And these 256 different outcomes also define 256 different configurations in epoch E+2, which results in different number of slots. But we need to adjust. So on the left-hand side, we see the different number of slots in epoch E+2, but we need to adjust these numbers by the sacrificed slots in epoch E. And what you can see with this red column on the very right end of each of these figures is that Lido could have been better off in this particular example by selectively proposing and withholding certain blocks, but Lido was nice to the Ethereum users. They did publish all their blocks. Another objective that a validator could take is the so-called target slot utility. So imagine that you know a priori, you know beforehand that in slot 2 in epoch E+2, there will be an NFT launch or airdrop or some high MEV activity. Then maybe the validator doesn't care about maximizing the number of obtained slots, but they care about just grabbing that specific slot in the future. And so this was identified by Tony Verstetter in an ETH research post, but we analyze in the paper. Okay, and this was all kind of known before our paper, and in our paper we describe a new strategy that allows the validator to have even more power, manipulative power over the output of the RANDAO. So I have two assumptions for this setting. The first is that the adversary controls at least 20% of the stake, and the second is that this is the configuration of the slots next to each other. So honest is the blue, the malicious is the RANDAO manipulator is the red. So imagine that we have these slots, honest, malicious, honest, malicious. Then what the adversary can do, the adversary can fork out the middle guy in slot n+2. How? So in slot n+1, the adversary just builds this block secretly and votes for it with all its validators. And the rest of the network didn't see this block being proposed, so they just vote for the block coming from slot n as the head of the blockchain. What happens in slot n+2? Now the honest validators will build their block on top of the block coming from slot n because they didn't see the block coming from slot n+1. And again, the honest validators will vote for this honest block, but the malicious validators will build on top of the secret block coming from slot n+1. And finally, in slot n+3, now the adversary will publish its fork containing these two blocks coming from slot n+1 and n+3. And if we do the math, this upper branch of the tree has 2 alpha plus 0.4, 40% of votes. That's an idiosyncrasy of the Ethereum protocol. So if you publish a block on time, then you get a proposer boost, which is currently 40%. And so on the upper branch, we have 2 alpha plus 40% of the votes. On the lower branch of the tree, block tree, we have 1 minus alpha votes. So if alpha is larger than 20%, then the upper branch will be accepted as the canonical chain. And so basically the adversary, if they wanted to, then they can fork out this honest guy. And there are many such configurations where you could fork out an honest guy with even less stake. And how can we use this? So why is this useful for in the context of RANDAO manipulation? Imagine, again, this is the setting. If you don't know forking, then what can the adversary do? Just a binary choice. The adversary can either publish a block in the tail slot or not publish a block. But now, so that's just two binary, it is just a binary choice. But since we can fork the blockchain, we can do more. So the adversary might decide to fork the blockchain, so not publish a block. So this is a secret block. But since the honest guys don't see it, they publish a block. And if now the adversary can decide whether to finish forking, meaning that the adversary in slot 31 will build its block on top of the secret block and publish that branch, or the adversary could decide, because now the adversary sees the RANDAO reveal coming from slot 30, the adversary could give up its forking plans and act honestly. And one important thing here is that the only RANDAO reveal, RANDAO output of the epoch that's visible to the adversary corresponds to the uppermost branch of the tree, because that doesn't include the output of the honest RANDAO reveal. So that's the only visible at the very beginning of the attack. So if it gives an unusually high number of slots in epoch E +2, then the adversary will fork. And the regular selfish mixing could happen. So if we only know selfish mixing, then the adversary only sees the last two branches of this decision tree. But since we have forking, this is just to build up your intuition. Since we have forking, now the adversary's strategy space is much larger, so also the adversary's manipulative power increases. Okay, I'm not going into the details how we evaluate it. It's just some Markov decision process in stochastic tools. The main idea is that if the RANDAO would be cryptographically unbiasable, then what we would see is just this blue line. So if you have alpha portion of the stake, then you should only be entitled to propose alpha portion of the blocks as well in expectation. But since you can manipulate the RANDAO, if the adversary only uses selfish mixing strategies, then that's the brown line, then the adversary can increase its fair share. If the adversary reads our paper and uses our proposed random manipulation strategies, then the adversary can increase even further its fair share. And we also evaluate this target slot probability. So if you look at this graph, let's say Lido has roughly 30% of the stake. If Lido would wanted to have a specific slot in a future epoch, they can do it roughly with 20%. Okay, if the random would be completely unbiasable, then what would we see in this graph? It would be completely blue, right? So there was nothing you could do. The only thing you would need to do is just publish a block whenever you have the chance to publish a block. But since this randomness beacon is biasable, the adversary can do nasty things. And the adversary is more incentivized to do nasty things as also the staking power increases, because now it has more choices to do nasty things. So it's kind of pretty alarming that this figure is not entirely blue, but you also see forking, selfish mixing, and so on. So all these techniques that I described so far are good for the adversary, right? Because they get richer and richer, they have more blocks. But it's good for me and you and for us regular users. So it's a negative externality for everyone, because now the throughput of the blockchain decreases. As more and more people and coalition of adversaries uses these random manipulation strategies, also the blockchain throughput decreases, because now we will see a lot of missed adversarial slots and a lot of honest blocks that are forked from the canonical chain. A natural question that we also analyze in the paper: has the RANDAO been manipulated? So we have these two adversarial strategies, and in the case of selfish mixing, we only see the one RANDAO reveals that has been published. So we don't see the entire history that we would need in order to recompute all the possible RANDAO configurations that the adversary sees. So with selfish mixing, it's a little bit tricky whether manipulation happened or what's the real reason why the adversary didn't publish those blocks, because as the public, we cannot recompute all what the adversary sees. But the situation for forking is different, because with forking, even though an honest block is forked from the blockchain, the RANDAO reveal is there, so we can recompute every possible state. And if a forking happens for the reasons of RANDAO, then it's completely visible for everyone. We made quite a large experimental analysis, so we collected all the data since the merge up to 2024, October 1st. We use some public validator pool mapping, so we know which validator belongs to which entity, Lido, Binance, Kraken. And the way you need to read this graph is that, for instance, 67 times Lido had 6 tail slots at the end of an epoch. And out of these 67 times, Lido missed at least one of these tail slots, only once. So what you can see from this figure is that all these wealthy entities already had dozens of opportunities to mess around with the randomness and manipulate it in their favor. Okay. What you can see here is that when all the validators proposed all their tail slots, then actually a lot of times, this is the worst column, a lot of times they could have been better off by not proposing one of these tail slots. So actually the bottom line here is that hundreds or thousands of times, like in case of Coinbase, almost 5,000 times, they would have been better off by manipulating the RANDAO whenever they had the chance. So they leave a lot of money on the table, like millions of dollars. I'm not going into the details and describe the statistical tests that we use. They are quite classical tools like z-tests, t-tests. The bottom line is that there's an expected empirical distribution. There's an expected distribution and an empirical distribution that we gathered, and they match pretty nicely. So with strong statistical tools, we cannot reject the hypothesis that they are not manipulating the RANDAO. But again, this is only valid, the statement, for a very particular type of RANDAO manipulation, which manipulates the RANDAO consistently. So maybe they are doing it once every day or once every month, but what we could say and what we do see that they are not doing it like all the time. And this is what also the statistical tests say. Okay. There were 2 forking reorgs executed by Lido, and in both cases, Lido was better off by forking poor home validator or who knows who out from the canonical chain. Was it on purpose or not? Only they know. Okay, so wrapping up, food for thought. Why don't we see random manipulations yet? Can we tolerate this level of manipulability? Is it going to be part of the MEV toolchain? I would guess in the long run, because people are leaving millions of dollars on the table. So I would expect that sooner or later this vulnerability and the weakness of the randomness generation protocol would be exploited. This is just a personal opinion. Shall we just rely on social slashing as a fix? I would say no, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. We would be on Wall Street in New York, right? So I would say that we need cryptographic guarantees for unbiasability to not have this rich gets richer phenomenon. And we know how to do it, right? So we know verifiable delay functions, weighted threshold VRFs. There are many tools, and we know how to build unbiasable randomness beacons. Feel free to reach out wherever you want. And here's our paper, which was accepted at CCS this year. So maybe we will see you at Taipei, Taiwan, CCS 25. Here's the GitHub where you can access all the code and scripts that we wrote. And now is the million-dollar question. What should we do as a community? Should we fix the RANDAO? We sent an academic grant to the EF. It got rejected. Or we should just go back to New York City and Wall Street and pray social slashing, or some Vitalik saves us, or I don't know. Let's exploit this MEV, yeah? Or we should just chill and have a club mate, I don't know. So that's a question for all of you. I don't have answers. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you, István. Now I actually have some questions for you, if that works.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So the first one, doesn't missing a slot mean that the proposer gives up all fees and MEV revenue? Is that considered here?
Sure. That's absolutely considered as in the toy example at the very beginning of the talk, because in the future, you might have much more than just this one missed slot. So in the end, in total, it will be better for the manipulator validator.
Okay. Then the next one, I think you also touched upon it a little bit. Isn't this kind of attack easy to detect? Wouldn't it harm the attacker's reputation?
So for selfish mixing, I mean, for forking, it's absolutely visible.
I think we can't see your slides anymore.
Oh, okay. So anyways, for forking, it's absolutely visible because all the RANDAO reveals are on chain. But for selfish mixing, by definition, some of the RANDAO reveals are missing because the adversary didn't publish them. So if you don't have access to the RANDAO reveals, you cannot recompute all the RANDAO outcomes that the adversary sees. So in that case, we can only rely on statistical tests.
Got it. And then maybe last one. What if an attacker tries to maximize the number of tail slots they control in the next epoch so that the attack can be more easily reiterated? Have you done this analysis?
Yes, and interestingly enough, the optimal strategy so this is not the optimal strategy. So this called, like in the paper, we call it like tail maximization strategy or something like that. And intuitively, this is what you should do if you want to optimize the number of slots overall. But as it turns out, this is not the optimal strategy. So you can do better than that. And what you could see in the slides were the optimal strategies and not the tail maximization strategy. So yes.
Okay. I think we have time for one last one. Should we should we or can we address these vulnerabilities as part of the Beam chain design?
Yeah, I mean, so there was this academic grants round for Ethereum, and there was a wish list where they were saying, please let's fix the RANDAO because we know that there are vulnerabilities, and so we thought that they want to fix it in the upcoming Beam chain update, but it seems that other more important things like ZK, VM, I don't know, has more priority. So I don't know what are the plans for people at the EF, but it seems not fixing the RANDAO. I mean, it's not an issue until it will be an issue and exploited, but that's just a personal opinion.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye.